Of course, with that Canadian wildfire smoke moving into the area, it not only causes the hazy skies, like Emily said, but there are those health concerns, and that hits certain groups, people with respiratory or lung issues such as asthma, pregnant women, the elderly, and young infants, especially if they were born prematurely, they could be affected.
They're going to be particularly susceptible to these fine particulates that you breathe in that get deep in the lung, and that can cause a lot of inflammation and irritation and exacerbate their underlying conditions, causing more mucus production, causes the muscles around the airways to constrict, making it harder to breathe. And you can develop an asthma attack or an asthma exacerbation with difficulty breathing, coughing, wheezing, and generally not feeling well.
If you do have any of these underlying conditions, you should avoid going outside as much as possible right now. Limit your physical activity, wear a mask, and make sure, of course, you are taking your prescribed medication.